I'm the curator at Stan Hywet Hall and Gardens in Akron, Ohio. It's so nice to be with you tonight. I'm going to share some information about this big restoration that we did starting in 2015, and it took about 6 years. So when I started at Stan Hywet in 2014, it was really almost the very first conversation that I had with the executive director was, well, Julie, we're going to start a capital campaign, and we're going to raise, our goal is to raise $6 million total for some different projects around property. And we intend to designate $1 million of those dollars to the Manor House to do some restoration on interior spaces. And up until this point, there really hadn't been a significant restoration to the Manor House. It had been left, fairly stagnant at that point, little repairs here and there. So this was a really big change and a big initiative to put this amount of money back into the house and to try to return a lot of those spaces back to their 1915 appearance when the Seiberlings first moved in to Stan Hywet. So just to quickly share you what some of those other projects were, I guess I should have asked, has everyone been to Stan Hywet before? Okay, so there will be like a little bit of shared knowledge. We had $1.2 million that went to our dry stone perimeter wall. So that's the old stone wall that goes around and circles property. It had fallen into disrepair. Some of it had kind of toppled over. The rocks had fallen out. So there were several spots where it was crumbled. So actually the state of Ohio provided funding to pay for that to be rebuilt. Stained and leaded glass windows. There are stained and leaded glass windows in all 5 of our historic buildings on property. So we have the Manor House and then our service buildings, the Gate Lodge Carriage House, Gardener's Cottage, so it's 4 service buildings. So this was phase 1 of that restoration. All of the leading in those windows was original, so 100 years old, almost 100 years old, and starting to deteriorate, being exposed to the elements. So we prioritized the windows that were in the greatest need. We actually worked with a Cleveland company, Whitney Stained Glass, and they came out and did that phase 1, and we still continue to work with them on window projects as we need them. The tea houses and the hidden aspect. Our tea houses, sorry I don't have pictures for these things, are built on top of a sandstone cliff face. Well, you're going to come for a rocks program in a little bit. You can learn about geology, and sandstone is constantly shifting and constantly kind of degrading and becoming sand. So our tea houses were starting to shift on this sandstone cliff face, so we had to do some engineering, work with geologists to reinforce that wall and make sure that they didn't go anywhere. And then finally, the $1 million for the Manor House, and then hopefully a remaining $2 million to go into our endowment to help ensure longevity for Stan Hywet. So the majority of the rooms were located on the first floor of the Manor House. So here's the front entrance where you come in. Music room, great hall, library, west porch, all those real principal rooms. Really every room on the floor except the first floor except the dining room, and then here, these are all those domestic staff spaces back there. So, and then there were 3 rooms on the second floor also. So we'll see examples from most of those. The first thing I had to do is, so I just started at Stan Hywet. I was just learning who were the Seiberlings, everything I could about the family at that point. And I realized I also now had to really focus a lot of attention on figuring out what had been done historically restoration-wise, what was original, what was a replacement, what are the priorities as we start to go from room to room and do these restoration projects. So I worked with a team. There are 2 other members of the collections department, 2 other full-time people, to kind of start to take stock of what resources do we have, what information do we have. One of our most valuable resources is what we call our historic fragment collection. So one of our team members had the task of going through these boxes and inventorying everything and then organizing them by room. So all of the fragments that came out of the music room are together, all the fragments from the Great Hall are together. So they're in all sorts of states. So here, this is the original valance to one of the music room windows, still very intact, but then we have, this is a chair seat cushion cover, very, very fragmented. So in all different conditions. We have such a great collection of fragments because the Seiberlings lived at Stan Hywet until 1955. That's when Mr. Seiberling passed away. And then the house, 2 years later, passed to the foundation that was formed to take care of it and open it to the public as a museum. So when the foundation took over, it was for the most part volunteer-based, and mostly women who came in and said that, well, we need to kind of spruce this place up. Things had fallen into disrepair. Different wings had been cut off, not really used. And the Seiberlings, when they moved in 1915, didn't change anything about their house from that point forward. They lived in the same home for 40 years, didn't redecorate, didn't really reupholster, change much. So fabrics had worn out, things were a little shabby. So the volunteers started to go through, prioritize things, and I thank them every day for this as they started to make decisions about replacing things, they would save the original materials. This was really had a lot of foresight on their part. Most people would have been like, ugh, who wants this shabby old curtain, or who cares about this like old tattered upholstery, just chuck it. They saved everything, which made our job so much easier because we could look at the real sample and say, okay, what are we going to do now to recreate or restore these materials so the rooms as closely resemble their original appearance as possible. So we also went back to our archives as well. What documents do we have to help reveal what the rooms looked like? So there were 2 historic inventories. One was done in 1935 and one was done in 1955 when Mr. Seiberling passed away as part of settling his estate. So we had those. It went room by room and listed and described every object in each room. And what we found out from 1935 to 1955, they didn't move their furniture either. So things were pretty much where they had always been. Yay for consistency. There were also inventories done. This is an example down here, this note card, in the 60s and 70s. Again, that foundation era where volunteers were going through and trying to create their own system to catalog what was in the spaces, describe different things. We had a lot of correspondence between the Seiberlings and their interior decorators, so when the house was being designed between 1912 and 1915. So that often spoke about objects being selected, describing curtains, describing fabrics, things like that. We had a historic photo collection. Their son Willard was an amateur photographer, so he spent time photographing a lot of the rooms, especially on the first floor, just before the family moved in, kind of documentary photos, and well as just family photos, Christmas celebrations, things like that. So of course we didn't care about the people in the foreground. We were zooming into like, what's that lampshade look like way in the background? What's this look like? We got real lost in the details of a lot of our room pictures. So from all of this information, we actually created files for each room where we documented, starting in 1915 all the way up to present day, as far as we could go, what did we know about each room, what had been changed, what was original, what had been restored. We went through all the kind of what was called the curatorial committee in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and these, again, we're talking about, oh, we're going to replace these curtains, we're going to change this, change that. So we were documenting each of the rooms, so now for future generations, when the next curator comes in, they don't have to redo this all again. They can just pull out the music room folder and say, oh, here's everything from, the start from 1915 all the way up to present date. So we still maintain those records as we change things. Before I started in 2009, they also had a conservation master plan created. So they worked with the ICA, which is located in Ohio City, just on the west side of Cleveland. They're a conservation lab. That's another person you should have come and speak sometime. They'd be great speakers. They walked through the house and created a prioritized list for the staff at that time of these are your high priority objects, medium, low, and then also gave some estimates of cost, which helped us come up with our budgets for each of the rooms as we were trying to divvy up this $1 million between these different spaces. So from all that, like I said, we created files. We also created these binders, especially for fabrics. We had so many fabrics in each room. We had upholstery fabric, we had curtain fabrics, we had lampshade fabrics. So keeping those all straight. So for each room, we actually now have a fabric binder, and we refer to them by generation. So first generation being the fabrics that would have been in the house in 1915 when the Seiberlings moved in. Some rooms have up to 4 generations at this point. Some are only on their second generation. So I tend to use that word. I just wanted to make sure I defined it for you. And so then we have a list for each room of listing all the generations, photos. So again, that documentation, so the next person can just walk in and be like, oh, I understand what happened. So what was our goal for all of this? We have all of this funding now. All of a sudden, we're just flush with cash, lots of possibility. But what is the goal of restoring these rooms? And we very quickly kind of came to the conclusion of we are interpreting, we're not decorating. So of course we had a lot of people that came in and say, oh, this is shabby. You should get rid of this and get something new. And it's like, no. We're not going to get rid of original materials. We are trying to return the house to what the Seiberlings looked like when they moved in, but there's also value in keeping objects that show wear, that show use. So this is an example. This is the rug in the Great Hall. The lighting's not very great, but it's very worn out. The Great Hall was their living room. So this carpet was walked on endlessly for 40 years. And there was talk of, well, are you going to get that remade, or are you going to, fix those worn out parts? And we said, well, no, that's kind of part of the legacy. So there were kind of intentional decisions made to keep some of those older materials. And then, of course, we had things that sometimes we didn't like. So we didn't think they matched. So in the west porch, for example, we have this really bright floral pattern curtain, and then we learned that the upholstery fabric was a stripe. So especially some volunteers, when this room was done, was like, Julie, it doesn't match. And I said, well, you don't think it matches, but to the Seiberlings, that's what they selected, so we're going to keep it. Now you kind of don't notice it as much, but it was one of those things that was a little shocking to some people. Also, there were things that were missing that we put back, one of them being shears. So a lot of our windows were bare when we started this process. All of the shears had kind of worn off. They hadn't been replaced. What we also found is sometimes the shears would be kind of more of a modern appearance where you had one long shear that ran the whole length of the window and you would draw them across. What we found is historically each individual pane at Stan Hywet had its own shear. So here you're looking at 6 individual shears. And this is an example of a historic one. So we replaced the hardware and we put all the shears back as they would have been when the Seiberlings lived there, which was a little more expensive, a little more time consuming, but again, we were interpreting, not decorating. And here's another example in the music room. This is a historic photo. You're looking towards the stage. And we had these 2 tapestries, but when I started, they were actually hung inside the stage walls. So from the tour route, you couldn't see them. They were also being exposed to a lot of daylight from those big floor-to-ceiling windows that are on our stage in the music room. So it wasn't a great place for them to be stored long-term. We found this historic photo and said, hey, wait a second. These are actually hung on either side of the stage. Well, isn't that different? We didn't know about that. And we saw that it kind of had these valances and side curtains that were framing them when they were positioned there. And when Brittany was doing that historic fragment inventory, she came across these valances and these curtains, and she came and got me, and she says, these look familiar to me, but I can't place them. And so I walked in and I said, oh, I think I know exactly where those went. Those are the music room curtains that are supposed to hang around those tapestries. So now we had all the pieces back together, and we went and hung them back on either side of the music room. So here you see them now, and they've been there since about 2016. So there's 3 different approaches I'm going to talk about when it came to how we approach each of the rooms. There's preservation, which is where you try to really save as much of the original material as possible. You're not going to change only a minimal amount or try to kind of stabilize what you have. Restoration, where some of that original material is gone or too far damaged, so you have to put new material in there to return it to its original periods. Because something like this might seem too distracting, a little too damaged. You don't want the person or the people viewing the room to be distracted by what's missing as opposed to what's there. And then recreation, where something was broken, damaged, and in the case of fabrics, the original fabrics are too faded, too worn out, so we had to look to actually recreate them as well. So there'll be examples of each one. So preservation first. An example would be in the solarium, which is the Asian-themed room on the first floor. There is a marble floor as well as a marble fountain in that room. And we didn't actually think that the fountain was dirty at all. And we had someone come in. He actually came in for another project, but he was a marble restorer, and he did a lot of stone work and things. And he said, you know that your fountain actually has a lot of sedimentation on it, a lot of mineral deposits from running city water through the fountain for so many years. So he did a little test spot. So you can see what we thought was a white fountain is actually this kind of creamy buff color. So then we said, well, Stuart, now you've ruined it. Now we have to clean it because we can't leave it like that. And so I think, oh yeah, this is the before and this is the after. So just a big, big change. And then the floor as well, as you can see, it's actually this lovely dark kind of maroon red color, and maybe the lighting's a little too light, but there are these green striations through it as well. When I started, I thought the floor was black. I thought it was black and white marble. And he even himself was surprised because he said, well, I could also just buff out this marble floor while I'm here. I have all my equipment. So he gave us a quote. We said, sure. And then that was another instance where people come bursting into my office. You have to come downstairs right now. And so I went downstairs and I said, oh my gosh, the floor is red. So we had a lot of really nice surprises like that sometimes. Again, west porch, across the hall from the solarium with the arts and crafts tile in there. This is what the floor looked like when I started. All of this kind of build up gunk, again, from kind of mopping and using cleaning products that gets built up in the wax finish of that floor. So Stuart had to, our marble and floor guy went over it again and did all this lovely cleaning. Some of it he was even doing almost with like a little toothbrush to get it out of all of those, but and then put a coating on it so it really warmed up the color of the tile and made a huge difference. And then same thing, cleaning just some of those marble planters and pedestals in there, huge difference from before, so in much better shape. And then the music room, this was one of my favorite projects. So there are sconces all around the walls of the music room, and they hang with crystals. So Whitney Stained Glass, who works on us with our windows, was actually in the Manor House to look at a chandelier that was broken that we were going to have repaired. And Pete, the owner of the company, walked into the music room, and he's just kind of strolling around. And he said, did you realize that no two sconces in this room are the same? And so then I started, and I was like, well, now I do, Pete. And so he said, we could fix that for you. And I said, okay. And I said, well, we actually have some loose crystals upstairs in a box in storage that probably go in this room. We just have never kind of taken the time to sit down and figure out where do all these individual crystals go. So they made us a quote, and they came back one winter when we were closed. We're always closed from January to April 1st. They took apart each sconce, so then it was bare, like this one here in the center, and they made sure the frame was stable if they had to do any kind of repairs to the metal frame. They laid out, so the tape divides the different sconces. So this is one kind of grouping of crystals, per sconce, and laid them all out, figured out what was missing. They created a whole nomenclature around the crystals. So it was like, this is an oak leaf crystal. This is a small bead, a medium bead. They measured them all. What they found is that each sconce contains 430 individual crystals of all different shapes and sizes. So here you have kind of some pictures of the different sizes, different shapes that we have. Loose crystals, again, they were able to integrate all the loose crystals we had back into the sconces. So all but one is entirely complete at this point. And then this is what they look like at the end. We did recreate sconce shades based on the original, so it's kind of a beigey gold fabric with this hot pink trim, exactly as the originals were. So now we're going to talk about restoration. So here's a picture of the interior. This is actually the old interior of the ICA. I moved a few months ago, so they're at a new location, but they were really full partners in the whole process, and we worked closely with them over the whole 6 years it took, constantly bringing objects up to them or them coming to us to give us quotes on things and help us figure out. They have conservators there that work in every material. So they have paper conservators, painting conservators, object-based conservators who will work in glass, metal, plaster. Basically, there was almost no project they couldn't touch. And if they said, well, that's a little too complicated for us, then they were able to recommend someone to take care of it. So here's some of the work they did. So this is a humidor for storing cigars and cigarettes, but you can see the lid cracked and also lifted up due to humid conditions, and then it just couldn't kind of go back to the way it was. So they were able to flatten that and repair the crack, so you can't see it anymore. This is one of my favorites. This vase got knocked off of a shelf. There was by a window, and the wind was too strong. It blew the screen open, knocked the vase off, and it shattered in the solarium one day. So we picked up all the pieces as much as we could. So this is what it looked like when they received it, and that's what it looked like when they were done. They put it all back together, and it's seamless. You can't see any cracks or anything. And this is a desk that's in the music room. I want to look a little more closely at this one. So this one you can see we're missing the ivory. These are all befores. So there's kind of these striations or lines here in the black paint that's very distracting. There's a big crack right there in that side. It's missing there are the keyholes there, but they're missing their mother of pearl inlay. So again, they were able to replace all that, diminish those lines, fix the cracks so that you don't see them anymore, and just kind of make the appearance better, more appealing, and more original as to what it would have been when the Seiberlings had it. And then another example, there's a couple more. So this is a footstool where it had become recessed like that due to use, of course, people putting their feet down on it, so they were able to puff it back out, do some repairs to this tapestry material, this needlepoint, so it was more stable. And then overzealous cleaning, probably by housemaids, just too much elbow grease on this painted metal surface. So a lot of that paint is missing, but we knew it was red, so they were able to put it back. But see, they still leave the best. I love working with ICA because they really do have an understanding of, we never want anything to look new and shiny at Stan Hywet because it's an old house, so we want everything to blend, to be kind of on the same aesthetic level. So it's still, there's kind of a little bit of discoloration, a little scratcher, ding here or there, and that's all left very intentionally by them, but it really helps with the overall appearance. So recreation, this is where we spend a lot of time, especially on fabric. Oh, but I'll talk about this project also because this was good. So this is a pair of candlesticks here that belong in the reception room. So this one was always out, and then I found this one in storage, but as you can see, it was badly damaged. It's made of plaster, so at some point it had probably gotten knocked off a cabinet or a shelf and had broken, so they saved what pieces they could. So I took it up to ICA and I said, can you maybe recreate what's missing, or what can we do? So they had it for a little while and they said, you know, that's just too hard. That's not going to be successful. So our suggestion is we will make a mold from this one and we'll recreate a brand new one. And then this one just can go in storage as the original one. And they painted this one so that it is absolutely identical to that one. You cannot tell them apart now unless you flip it over and look at the number on the bottom, because one of them is listed as a reproduction and one of them is listed as the original. So, magicians. Virginia's bedroom, one of the rooms on the second floor that we did restoration on. So when I started, and for many years before me, the room had wallpaper on it, but it was this kind of white on white printed design. Pretty boring. We knew from descriptions of the inventory that it was described as a gold fleur-de-lis paper, but we didn't have a piece of it when we started doing our research and looking into it. So we were a little stuck in this space because we really wanted to replace the wallpaper, but sometimes we got into situations where we decided sometimes not to do something because we didn't have enough information, because we didn't want to make a mistake or do something inauthentic. So we were worried that we would get into a situation here where if we just picked a gold fleur-de-lis wallpaper, it would look too modern. We would kind of miss the mark on it. So we left this room to the very end. It was the last one we worked on in 2021. It was our COVID room. And my coworker, Chloe, was actually, this always happens, you're in storage looking for something else, and you find something you weren't expecting to. And she found this little scrap of wallpaper. And again, she comes into my office and says, look what I found. And I said, oh my gosh, Chloe, that's Virginia's wallpaper. It has to be. It's gold fleur-de-lis. Where else would it go? So we worked with a company. Actually, we had to go to 3 different wallpaper companies. A lot of wallpaper nowadays is printed digitally. God bless digital technology. The problem with our wallpaper is that the original wallpaper was made with a metallic gold paint. You cannot print digitally with metallic paint. The printers, that technology does not exist yet. So to the first 2 companies said, we will do it for you, but we can only do it in a flat gold paint. And we said, well, that's not what we want. It has to be metallic. So we got a hold of a third company out in California. And they said, well, what we'll do is we'll print the paper, because behind the gold fleur-de-lis, it looks kind of like cracked plaster. So they said we can print that kind of cracked plaster on the background, and then we will hand silk screen the gold fleur-de-lis on with metallic paint. So they actually did this. They made a video for us. They're all masked up because they did it in 2020 when it was COVID. But you can see it on the assembly line, these huge long pieces that are laid out on the tables in their factory that they're going down the line and putting the pattern on. And then we had our wallpaper guys come in and install it for us. So you can kind of see some close-ups there of it in the space. And it was really such a phenomenal game changer for that room. So if you have not been to Stan Hywet in a few years, I hope that Virginia's room would look very different to you now with that wallpaper. We also did some recreation with carpet. So when I started, and still in many spaces, we have just kind of a generic brown, what we call service carpet. So we don't want people to walk on the original floors and kind of do any damage, wear out the varnish on the wood, or walk on our original carpets. In many cases, our historic rugs are kind of pushed back from the tour route, and we have that brown service carpet. So that carpet existed on our main tower stairs and down the length of the hallway on the second floor. So that was worn out. It was over 20 years old. We replaced the service carpet in many spaces throughout the house as part of this restoration as well. But when it came to the stairs and those upper hallways, I said, well, can we maybe investigate a different choice? I had been to some other historic house museums where I'd seen recreated carpets made to look like the originals. So we had pictures of the stairs showing the runners. We actually still own all of these original historic runners. They're just all in storage because we can't have them out and have people walk on them. So we worked with a company in Hudson, Ohio, who then put us in touch with a fabricator that could do custom carpets. And we used, this is a corner of one of our original runners, and we recreated the stair carpet. So now when you go up the tower, you're walking on what appears to be a much more authentic rug. And we continued it down our second floor hallway. This is the master bedroom hallway. Again, here's the original pattern and what we recreated as well. They're not identical designs, but they're very, very close. The company could only had so much color choice, but we were able to get really close, and very happy with what turned out. Here's another example of a lamp. As I mentioned, there are choices sometimes where we can only take it so far. This was one where this lamp, here it is, a historic photo from the 1940s. We could tell the base has actually a painted floral pattern on it, but it was almost entirely rubbed off. So ICA said, what do you want to do? We can leave it unpainted at this point, or our suggestion would be to paint it kind of a solid red color. So you could have it out, you know it was out in the room. Right now you can't have it out because of its appearance. And so we decided to go with that solid red paint. And as well, the fabric here on the lampshade, they suspected was a shawl, a silk Asian shawl that was turned into a lampshade. Well, of course, the textile conservator at ICA tried to actually make her own fabric, make a pattern. She shopped around for something, really couldn't find anything close enough. So we still had the original trim. This was in storage. So we brought that back out, and then she said, well, I'm going to suggest this kind of gold fabric. It has a very subtle pattern on it. She said, if we ever find anything that's better, I'll swap them out for you. So, and we did lampshades in all the rooms. Every room has multiple lamps in it. All the lampshades needed to be redone. So I think we redid over a dozen lampshades as part of the restoration. And they were each a journey. We're back in the music room. There are 3 different floor lamps in that room. All of them needed replaced. So the top 3 are the lampshades original, and then these are the restorations afterward. And this blank one, what we found is there was a lampshade in that room that didn't belong in that room. So I took what I thought were the 3 original lampshades of the music room up to the ICA. Jane, the textile conservator, I sent her historic photos, I sent her fabric samples, everything she needed, so she could kind of recommend, here's the choices I think we need to make to get these back to their original appearance. And she called me back and she said, I think you brought me the wrong lampshade. And I said, no, those are the 3 that were in the music room. And she said, well, I'm looking at the historic photo, and the shape of this one shade doesn't match the dimensions of this lamp, this particular lamp. So I went and looked and went back, and I said, oh gosh, you're right. So here it became lampshade dominoes, because we found out that lampshade actually belonged in the master bedroom. Then the master bedroom lampshade actually belonged in this room. So it's like we started to move them around the house and get each one back to where it originally was supposed to be. But what we found is that lamp in the music room, that lampshade was gone. We didn't have it anymore. We couldn't find it. So possibly it had gotten broken, damaged in some way, and thrown out, which started the domino game in the first place. So her next door neighbor is a mathematician. So she took the 2 existing lampshades, the photo, the historic photo. So he measured each of these shades, measured the dimensions of them in the photo, and then was able to figure out the dimensions of that 3rd lampshade. So, which thank God for him, because the rest we probably would have been like, well, we just have to make something. So she worked with a company that could make the wire frame, recreated the lampshade down here. So you can see it doesn't have this kind of little bump out at the top as pronounced. And then we picked out a fabric similar to the original and had it recovered, and it's back in the music room where it belongs. This fabric was actually original. This was first generation. So that lampshade had been hanging in there since 1915, which is pretty amazing when you still find some of that original material that doesn't just turn to dust the minute you touch it. And then upholstery as well. So we did a lot of replacement. The solarium was a room where the ladies from the foundation era in the 50s and 60s, they did replace the original fabric, and for whatever reason, they chose something completely different than the original appearance. Often they would try to get as close as possible. This was a bit of a miss. So it was this kind of powder blue, flat fabric. So we worked with a company to recreate the original blue and gold silk. That's now back on all the rooms. These are the 2 sofas in the Great Hall. That's what they looked like when I arrived. Very faded, washed out. This is a set of 6 chairs. This is the original fabric that was on the chairs. Actually found this fabric on eBay. I did a lot of eBay shopping. Sometimes I'd have an hour to kill at the end of the day, and I would just jump on eBay and type in crimson silk damask and see what would pop up. And I did get lucky a few times finding very similar patterns to original fabrics. So then I could purchase them, and that's what we would end up using. Here's the solarium again. This chair is compared to that reproduction fabric from the 60s. And then here we have that overall shot of the solarium with all of the furniture in it. So it's a big difference to have that blue and gold back in there as opposed to that kind of washed out powder blue fabric. And curtains, so many curtains. So in the music room, these are 2-story curtains that we had made. A lot of our curtain fabric, we put the time back into actually doing custom made fabric. So we'd work with companies like Scalamandre, La Joffa. And what was interesting is we found that some of the original fabric companies the Seiberlings used in 1915, their archives still existed. The fabric companies would get bought out by their competitors as they closed. So La Joffa, which is still in business today, is actually 2 historic companies that merged together. So the Joffa is for Johnson and Faulkner, and that's the company the Seiberlings bought a lot of their fabrics from. So they still had the Johnson and Faulkner archives, so we got to know their archivist very well, and we would call and say, all right, these are all the fabrics that we know we got from, that the Seiberlings bought from Johnson and Faulkner. So she would go and look them up, and she'd take pictures and be like, oh, here's the original page in their book. Here's all the different color choices they had. Which one's yours? And so we were able to do some, I'll show you some examples in a couple of minutes for that. But then sometimes we would send the company one of our original curtains. These curtains for the music room actually traveled to both France and Italy. They went to 2 different mills so we could get quotes on having them rewoven. So they've been to more European countries than I have at this point. And same for trims. We would have the trims custom remade as well to match originals. So I would send pictures like this showing the measurement, and then so they could give us a quote sometimes. For the library curtains, all we had left of a historic sample was this very dirty, incomplete fragment, but we had a historic photo. This is a blow up of a photo, so we could see it. And again, I sent this to the company, and based on the measurement, they were able to extrapolate out what that trim would have looked like and remade it for us. So here's an example of a Johnson and Faulkner fabric. So this is our breakfast room. We have this kind of Asian winter scene with birds on it. So these were the curtains that originally were on the room. Here is one of our original 1915 curtains. Some very well-intentioned volunteer decided, well, these are getting a little shabby, so we'll try to brighten them up by dyeing them yellow. So we were unable, at first we said, well, we don't know what the original colors look like because they're dyed yellow, but they didn't dye the tiebacks. So we had just this little scrap of tieback fabric that showed us the original fabric as well as the original trim, what the color was supposed to be. So we could work, and most of these fabrics, if it was a flat linen like this or a flat cotton material, they were digitally reproduced. So we would send them to a company in New York who would actually scan the fabric and then could reprint it on new fabric made to look old. So they do all the color correction, send us samples digitally. So it was all done with digital technology, which was a huge cost saving. So it allowed us to do even more. So if our restoration had probably been done 5 or 10 years earlier, we wouldn't have been able to do nearly as much as we did because the technology was just evolving so quickly and was really to our benefit. Another project in the breakfast room was the fireplace surround. So this was what the surround looked like. The breakfast room was a heavily used room by the family. That's where they had most of their informal meals. And then later, as they aged in the 30s and 40s and were not entertaining as much, they ate almost exclusively in the breakfast room. So they burned fires in this fireplace continuously. So these are Delft tiles, very, very soft tiles, easily damaged by the heat of that fire over the decades. So many of the ones in the center panel had fallen out or were really badly damaged. You can see an example here. This is a little hard to tell, but we actually had a volunteer who created, he reprinted them. He took photos of them, glued the photos onto the back foam material, and then taped the foam so it filled it in. So really, as you walked on the tour, if you didn't look too closely, you kind of didn't notice. That was a good solution, a short-term solution. But we said, well, we should really try to see what we can do permanently. So they're all little dogs and all these little poses, these little blue puppies on these tiles. So my coworker actually she's getting her master's degree at the time, and she took a trip to England as part of a program that she was participating in, and she came back after being gone for a couple weeks and said, oh, Julie, I walked through this really fantastic tile factory, and they do reproduction Delft tile. She said they might be perfect for the breakfast room project, and I said, oh, okay, well, let's see what the price is. So we worked with them, sent them pictures of our tiles. A lot of it was, again, done by computers. They sent us back pictures of what it would look like. We did eventually get real samples. They were able to kind of create this crackle appearance, so it looked aged and older. So they redid our little doggies here. There's kind of a before and after. And then we filled in that whole center section. So there's a slight color differentiation in the grout, but otherwise you really can't tell. and it's all put back together. So that is it. If anyone has any questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them, or if you have questions about Stan Hywet in general. Oh, yes.
I've been there a lot of times, and I want to ask you about the name. The last time I was there, they said it is pronounced Stan Hywet from the Old English.
Yes.
But you say Stan.
I do say Stan Hywet. I think both are right, because I think it is an Old English word, but I think language has evolved, and so the family descendants say it both ways, so I don't make a big deal about it. I think in the past there were curators that were very firm. Right. So she's probably a volunteer that's been around for a few decades, which is fine, but I'm a little more casual about it. Yes?
Why did the Seiberlings let the house get in disrepair?
So they had financial difficulties. So F.A. was the co-founder of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. He founded that company in 1898. He only ran it until 1921, and there was a recession across the country at that point after I almost said Revolutionary War, after World War I. And so he got caught up in that recession, and Goodyear got into some really significant financial trouble. So as part of a very long story, he actually stepped down from the company as part of that reorganization. So 6 months later, he founds a second rubber company, the Seiberling Rubber Company, but it was never nearly as successful. And then the stock market crashes in 1929. We go into the Great Depression. He just could kind of never get back to that real mega wealth that he had when he was president of Goodyear. And so when he passed away in 1955, there was no money left at that point after the Depression and the war years, which made Stan Hywet a little bit challenging. They actually almost had to sell it if the community hadn't stepped forward and said, we'll take care of it, we'll form a foundation, because nobody wanted it, because there was no money, all the gardens were overgrown, the interior had gotten really shabby. F.A. was bedridden for about the last 5 years of his life and sequestered to just one room. So the kids did the best they could. They had their own homes to pay for. They were raising families at that time to kind of allow their dad to stay in the house as long as possible. But it was hard. It was really hard for them to kind of keep Stan Hywet going with property taxes and the utility bills. So they ran out of money for him. Yes?
Has the swimming pool been restored?
So what has been restored in the plunge is there is a mural on the back that was done back in the 90s. But the pool, if you're asking if we'll ever fill it with water again, we won't, because filling it with water is not the problem. It's draining that's the problem. We don't know where the water will go. There's no way to know if the pipes, because all of those pipes are lead pipes, so they're all encased in cement as part of the foundation of the house, and we don't know if they're all still intact at this point, or if they've degraded over time. So we don't want to hurt our foundation or flood the neighborhood behind us. So yeah, there won't be any plans to fill the pool anytime soon. And there's no circulation in it, so it would just be stagnant water. We'd have to fill it and drain it over and over and over again. Any other questions? Yes.
On the preservation pictures you were showing, the tiles, were those Pewabic tiles?
In the west porch, those are Pewabic tiles. So those arts and crafts tiles that were back, here, I'll go back. But yes, we do have one room that is made of Pewabic tile. So it's the west porch on the first floor.
They still make those, right?
They do. That company is still in business. So it was found, here we go. So that's all Pewabic tile in Detroit, Michigan. So they still have a website. You can go up there if anyone's looking for an arts and crafts kitchen, bathroom, entryway. They still do it all. And we actually worked with them because in addition to a project I didn't talk about was the mural that's on the back of our fountain. So that was a 3-year restoration project. We had hoped that we'd be able to turn that fountain back on. That was one of our goals. But when ICA went through the process of trying to restore and stabilize those tiles, what they found is that they're very porous. The way they were fired by the Pewabic Pottery Company was kind of only like a half fire, as they explained it. It didn't make the tiles very hard. So they had all these mineral deposits inside of them. So they did something, I called it got a face mask. So they literally put this white stuff all over the fountain and tried to extract those minerals out of the tiles. It was not very successful, unfortunately. So they still hold a lot of minerals in there. So if we exposed it to water, to humidity, all those mineral deposits would start to show again and just do more damage. So the decision was made, we'd rather have it be stable And if there ever is a material that we can put as kind of a top coat, is my layman's terms for it, that would not do more harm than good to the tile, we'll consider that in the future, and then maybe we could turn it back on. But we did do all of the replumbing to it, so it's kind of ready to go if we ever can solve that problem of protecting the backside of the fountain. Yes?
What is the ICA refer to?
So it's Intermuseum Conservation Association, which is a terrible mouthful. So ICA is much easier. Yes.
Did they bring you in to do this, or did
Nope.
you come in and say?
I just got lucky. Yeah, so I had never done a restoration project of this scope and scale before. Stan Hywet's the third historic house museum where I've worked. The other two properties were on the East Coast. I lived both outside of New York City and in Connecticut. I was on the East Coast for over 10 years, and both of those were pre-Revolutionary War properties. So nothing of this scale at all. So it was very intimidating to walk into this, 1915 manor home and be told, you're in charge of $1 million and you have to make all this, look new or look fresh. But it was a lot of just on-the-job learning. The library was the first room that we did, and we did it only that room. We kind of took it as a little bit of a case study and figured out, okay, we need to have trim made. Where do you get custom trim made? Where do you get custom fabric done? So we just had to figure it out as we went and do our research and call people and get quotes and develop all those relationships. And then as we got going, we started doing 3 and 4 rooms simultaneously. So we always were juggling a whole bunch of projects at one time as we moved around the space. And of course, because if we needed to have trim made for the music room, well, we also need trim for Virginia's bedroom and the breakfast room and this. So I would send out huge chunks at one time and get all these different quotes and then kind of divvy them up based on what budget they were coming out of. Yes?
The base that they restored, I was just curious as to where it was originally from, or
What?
the base.
Oh, the vase? I think it was just something, we don't have specific information. So the Seiberlings weren't collectors or aficionados of anything in their home. They just wanted it to look like a Tudor home. So they bought paintings of people that they weren't related to and didn't know. And they bought, taxidermy that they didn't hunt themselves. They just needed it to all fit the theme. So again, they were working with their interior designer who was saying, oh, you should put this vase in the solarium, and how about these curtains here? And so a lot of things were just, they were decorating. So, yes.
How did you stay in budget? That was,
By a miracle.
my God, I just had my kitchen done. Sticker shock.
I will admit the original plan was to have $1 million. I was very fortunate. People are, of course, so supportive and passionate about the Manor House specifically that I was actually overfunded by $200,000. So I had a little bit of a cushion, and I used every penny of it.
Is the organ still there?
Mm-hmm. That was not part of it because that was restored separately in 2008. Sometime around that. So that's still, we have that serviced every year. So we're kind of always having upkeep to the organ. So there are always like little projects to pick away at out there. But the big, real massive restoration was done in 2008. Yes. Yeah, phase one is done. Phase 2 is kind of the next set of 15-ish rooms, mostly the rest of the bedrooms on the second floor, as well as some rooms on the third floor as well. So we had a new executive director start in October, so she's been there about 7 months. So she is kind of getting acclimated. We actually are also hiring a new director of development, so if anyone's interested in raising money for Stan Hywet or knows somebody, we would love to hire them. But we need kind of that position filled. Jenny, the executive director, as I said, is kind of getting acclimated and everything. But I think within a year or two, there are some other capital projects as well. We'll take care of old buildings and historic gardens, so there's always something that needs money and attention. We'll probably, again, come up with a list of projects of what are our priorities, and my hope is that phase 2 makes the short list, and again, we can fundraise for another $1 million or so and kind of finish the rest of those rooms as well.
How do you fundraise to get that?
A variety of ways. So it's everything from writing grants to going to the state of Ohio to see will you fund some specific project, because they do fund capital for different organizations, to going to foundations, private businesses. Some of the rooms, in this restoration, we're funded by a single donor, so either a corporation, business, or even just a single donor. We created price tags for each room, so the library is $75,000, the Great Hall was $100,000. So in a lot of instances, just one person funded the space, which is phenomenal that there's that kind of depth of money in Summit County, and the people are able to step up and help us. And of course, we thanked everybody and had different reveals and a big restoration celebration at the end in 2021 that we had a big party outside and invited all of the donors to come and celebrate the work. So we'll see whether it's by small dollars, which are still just as valuable. Even if you can donate $50, we will be happy to take your $50 and put it into restoring the Manor House, or if it's someone that can write a six-figure check. So it's just going back to all those people and building the case of this is a worthy project and we hope you'll support it.
Do you do like weddings and that kind of stuff?
Oh yes, we have a very robust rentals department at Stan Hywet. They do about 70 to 80 weddings a summer. So they kicked off, they had their first wedding, I think 2 weekends ago, and they'll marry people until November. So yes, it overtakes the property on the weekends. They'll do anywhere from, they can do like 5 to 8 weddings a weekend between Saturday and Sunday. They'll book 3 or 4 a day. It's Wild Kingdom on the weekends.
Or so if the wedding is, they just get married there. Are you doing the...
Yeah, it's not in the house. It all happens outside. You can only get married outside in the gardens. We do have what we call our rain chapel. We have a tent that you can kind of have your rain location. And then you can't have your reception at Stan Hywet, again, not in the historic interior. The gymnasium on the lower level, the historic gymnasium, it's been converted into a rental space. So you can have your reception in the Manor House basement or at the carriage house. The old 10-car garage was also converted into a rental space. Yes.
Do they still have the car shows that are in June?
Yes, Father's Day car show, June 18th this year. If anyone's looking for anything to do, bring your dad. And then we have another second car show now. It's year 4, I want to say, or 5. It's called Montebella. So that's exotic and luxury cars, like Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bugattis. And that's early September, like first weekend in September.
And then you have Ohio Mart.
And then we have Ohio Mart, first weekend in October. Yes, 4 days of artisan craft festival, over 100 booths, food. So yes, and then deck the hall. Come for Christmas. Come see the lights.
Does the house have steam heat?
Yes, we still use the original radiators and steam pipes. So boilers are new, but kind of the infrastructure of the house is still original. We replace the steam pipes, which hope to catch them before they burst. But it has happened. Yes.
Was the electricity put in as the house was built?
Yes. Oh, it's always been electrified, and it was upgraded in the 70s and 80s, so we're up to code. And it had all the modern conveniences. It had a telephone system, it had a central vacuum system at the time. So yes, always electrified. Well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.